Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing Terrorscape from Ice Makes. Terrorscape is a 2 to 4 player, kind of hidden movement / horror game in which you have one player playing as one of 3 killers in the base game, that is, while the other players play as a bunch of survivors who are trying to stay alive before they can either escape or call for help or any of those things. Now, this is going to be slightly hard to do with this giant mansion in the middle of the table, so let me first show you the overhead shot before we move this out of the way so I can talk about and show you the game. This is Terrorscape. You're going to have 2 different sides to this. The reason for this thing in the middle over here is because it gives you the opportunity for have 2 players seeing their own little maps in a very thematic way in which you, rather than having a little board and a player screen that you're kind of hiding behind, you have this giant mansion and each player can go ahead and independently move things around on their side of the board without the other person seeing it. So it provides a very great sense of table presence. It also has functionality in the game, which we'll have to come back to when I'm trying to show you specific aspects. But with that, let's try to move this out of the way without messing things up too much over here. That's going to be the giant mansion. We will shift this to the side, and let's talk about this game. So, like I said already, you're going to have 2 sides to the game. You have the survivors, and you have the killer. The killer is trying to, shockingly enough, kill the survivors. The survivors are trying to win. Now, winning does not involve getting rid of the killer. Honestly, we're going to let that guy or girl live to fight and murder other people in the future. Rather, what we will have is we're going to have the survivors are trying to either totally escape, which means they need to find the keys and then get back to the main hall. So that's one way that they win. And finding the keys involves going through these decks over here to gather the various keys. But once you do that, once you find the keys, you can go back to the main hall all together and get out. Or alternatively, you can go ahead and find the hidden exit. So if you find in the item deck the plans or the map to the hidden exit, then you can get the keys and go to the hidden exit. So that's kind of 1.5 ways to win. Find the keys and then use one of 2 exits. Alternatively, you can repair the radio and call for help. Repairing the radio means you go to the living room over here, you spend your action for the turn, repair the radio. Once all 5 cogs are on the radio, we're going to go ahead, and let's bring this back into play over here, we're going to put our little marker over here, and that's the police, and every round the police are slowly going to come and rescue you. So basically, you either repair the radio and stall things out, or you find the keys and get out. There are both of the ways that you win. The killer, on the other hand, wins by, well, killing the survivor. That's all you gotta do. Just kill the survivor, just make sure that they die, which is pretty simple, because the survivors, coming back to this over here, the survivors are going to be listed over here at the top. These are their wound cards, also how you track them being afraid. Too much fear will cause them to make noise in the location, and dropping noise in the location tells the killer where the survivors have been. So if you scare them too much, if you whisper past them in the hallway, which this particular killer over here loves doing that, she loves drifting past people and terrifying them, causing them to reveal their locations, but enough fear causes them to make noise, enough noise helps the killer find where they are, and finding where they are is a great way for you to start the process of trying to take them out. But that said, when you deal a wound to a survivor, you're going to go ahead and flip their card. If you deal another wound to them, they die. And if you deal 2 wounds to any survivor, well, the killer wins the game. You are either win altogether or not at all. Although there is a variant in which the survivors can win on their own. That's a separate conversation. We won't heavily touch upon that. Anyways, that's basically the core idea of the game. Now, the players are going to have one action every single turn. They're going to be moving around. They're going to be searching in different key locations to try to find the key deck. At the end of the turn, you're going to pick one person to go ahead and choose to draw 2 items to discover, and those will give you various tools you can give to the characters to go ahead and utilize in their help trying to win. But sometimes these items will cause noise. So this is noise icons because you went ahead and you grabbed something out of the closet, and turns out that thing that you grabbed likes to make loud jingly sounds, and that's not great for you because now you've caused noise, which means every time at the end of every turn, regardless of how well you controlled your own turn as a survivor, you do have the risk that that the killer will find out where you are because of the noise that you made. Meanwhile, the killer is going to be trying to wander around the board, taking various actions to sense where the victims are, to sense where the potential victims, call them potential victims. They're going to go ahead and try to use actions from their own deck of cards. We have the deck of cards over here. Those are going to drive their actions as far as giving you options, like are you in the blue zone? Where are you from me? And those actions will help them define where they are. That combined with the noise will give the opportunity to go ahead and slowly escalate attacks. Now, attacks are going to result in the survivors rolling dice, 1 less die for every degree of fear on them, and then you're going to be weighing that up against the killer's strength, and different killers, again, will have different ways that they are. So like the starting butcher is going to be a lot stronger starting off, but has a harder time pinning down his victims, versus when you're playing against the Spectre, Spectre's a lot faster, causes a lot more fear and a lot more terror, but it's going to take some time to level up her attack. So there's different ways that the various, and there's three killers in the base game before you dive into expansions. I should note, I have not dove into the expansions, I've only played through the base game so far. That's the basic idea of what's going on here. There's a few other small things to get into, which I haven't fully. You know, you have the specific abilities of each character. Some characters come with starting gear. Any other things I should be looking at? There's going to be items you can unlock. There's going to be unique items you can unlock as you level up your killer. You're going through this process over here of having the killer try to use their action deck to go ahead and try to hunt down the survivors. The survivors each have one action a turn to go ahead and move around the board and try to make sure that they, don't die and ideally find the keys, which again involves going to key locations, which means the killer knows that these locations are a little more centric. So as they move around, you might try to sense different areas. Are you in red? And then go ahead and try to hunt them down over here because maybe they're over here. Maybe this is a good place to go ahead and strike out, but you don't know for sure. And since the survivors know that, maybe they sat there in the hallway, which is a useless location that's not good at all, which is a great place to hide. And so you go ahead and have that little mind game going back and forth between the players. That's the basic idea of how you play through Terrorscape, which means I'm going to go ahead and dive into my review, starting off with ease of play. In the ease of play camp, I'll say that the rulebook, if you have the rulebook might appear longer than it actually is. Well, that's not entirely true. The rulebook is exactly as long as it actually is. But as far as the rules you need to get up and running, the rulebook's pretty straightforward. Only a handful of the first few pages are really what matters over there. There's going to be some information on variants. There's information on assembly of this whole structure over here. So if you're intimidated by that rulebook, if you pull this game out, you look at the rulebook and you're like, tomorrow night, you can probably finish the entire rulebook in 10 to 20 minutes, I'd guess. Past that, one of the things I love is the game gives you these separate rulebooks for the killer and the survivor. So in addition to the main rulebook, there are separate rulebooks for each player to have to reference the things that they need that are specific to them, as well as on the back to have just a quick breakdown of everything you need. The level of player aid that this is really, really great in terms of getting people up and running. Game time runs 30 to 45 minutes. I'd say 45 minutes for your first games, but it can definitely become 30, especially if the killer lands an early blow and manages to take down any one survivor. That's the basic idea as far as ease of play. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see that I was not liking, starting off with what I like, which is to begin with, you can't talk about this game without talking about the massive table presence that this is. This gives the game, I mean, ultimately, all this really is a player screen. If you've played any game with hidden movement, you have a player marking down the little hidden movement behind the board, and in this case, you have both of them marking down the hidden movement. Both players are operating without information, and to accomplish that in the best possible way, they have this giant mansion that goes in the middle of the table that adds both mechanically to the game, but also thematically, and gives the game a great table presence in the general setup over here. Two separate maps, a giant mansion in the middle, makes this game have a lot of eye candy. This is one of those games you see people playing it, and you want to go ahead and, play it. The fact that it's so easy to play and teach and quick playing is a plus as well. This is not a long, drawn-out 2.5-hour game. This is a fast-paced 30 to 45-minute hidden movement game where players are constantly trying to evade each other as you go through it. The different villains are going to feel dramatically different as far as the feel that they give to the game. They all play very differently, and they're going to force you as the survivors to reapproach your strategy or how you're trying to survive. Those are the main things that will mix up the gameplay experience every single time you play through it. The trade cards. The trade cards are going to be one of the, there's three variants of the game, if I'm not mistaken. The first variant, of which I've played two, not the third, because I have no interest in playing the third. But the variants you have in the game are going to be trait cards that go ahead and give things to each side to help balance the game. So if you're playing in a player group where you find that the killer's winning more, or maybe it's particular killers, maybe you find that the butcher wins more and the spectre not so much, although I'd say the reverse, but either way. But whatever you find, whether it's based on the player, whether it's based on the character you're playing as, if you need different things to modify the sides, the trade cards give you that flexibility so you can have a ideally more balanced experience. If you walk away from this game and you think, that was unbalanced, that is a solvable problem. Granted, you have to play a few games to get to that point, so I'm not saying it's not without frustration, but at least it is a solvable problem. There's also going to be, as far as other ways to play the game, there's a kind of, again, survivors winning alone aspect, which I have no real interest, kind of a semi-co-op aspect where you're all trying to survive against the killer, but you can win on your own, which I just don't have as much of interest in that style of gameplay. And the third aspect is going to give you separate goals for the missions. You have these new goals, which give you new things you have to do as the survivors, but they come with rewards if you accomplish them, and so that's a nice little variant as well to mix things up. So you have those various variants to adjust the difficulty, to give you other goals, semi-co-op if you want, and then the villains that are going to be the main thing that mix up the gameplay experience. As far as what I don't like in the game, the first thing I'm going to say is the setup of said table presence over here. This is not that hard to set up as far as understanding it. It still is a little irritating and frustrating trying to hold everything in play because this does not fit back into the box, shockingly enough. And so your options are twofold. Either this becomes a nice, coffee table piece that you throw up on a shelf behind you and everyone's like, ooh, what's this mansion? You're like, hey, do you want to play Terrorscape? So either this is something that loops people into the game, trying to get them interested in the game, or just out of sight, out of mind, or you are setting it up every single time you play. And if you're setting it up every single time you play, for a game that is only 30 to 45 minutes, spending 6 or 7 minutes trying to assemble the mansion, if you're like, it's fast last than 6-7 minutes? Probably, but it doesn't feel, it feels like this adds a decent amount to the actual table setup, and the allure and appeal of it gets less and less over time, because it's great the first time you play it. You're like, oh my gosh, we have this giant mansion. And then as time goes on, I'm like, you know what, player screens aren't so bad. This is nice, but it adds to the cost, it adds to the box size, it adds to the setup time, and while it does add to the table presence, that part gets old, and the other parts don't get old. They are equally frustrating the first time and the 17th time, and the allure of it, that gets less and less engaging over time. So, as much as I love this in one sense, I kind of wish they had other options so you didn't have to. I wish this was optional. Like when I play Castle of Burgundy Deluxe Edition, sometimes I play with the miniatures, sometimes I play with the little tokens. Over here, I don't really have that choice. I kind of wish they gave you that choice, that I just didn't have to assemble this mansion every single time. I'll also say that the one action per survivor can make it feel that you spend most of your time as a survivor just moving around. And this is where it depends on the player count you play as, because if you're playing as a one-player game where you control all 3 survivors, well, not one player, a 2-player game where you have 1 killer and then 1 player controlling all 3 survivors, because you always have 3 survivors no matter what the player count is, then it's not so bad, because, you know, even if you have to spend 2 turns moving over here and you run around, this guy doing his own action over here, well, not over there, but over there, this guy doing his own action, that still makes you feel like you're at least getting something done. Versus if you don't have that, if you're playing as a full 4-player complement where everyone's playing their own character, if you spend half your game just moving around, especially if other players are doing things like, ooh, I'm going to go ahead and hunt for keys, I'm going to fix the radio in the living room, all those different options, and you're like, I'm going to wander around to distract the killer and hope that I can keep you guys alive as long as possible, while there's merit to that strategically, it just means you're just basically the bait the whole game, who's just moving, and that's all you're doing. So that aspect kind of can pull away from your experience, especially at higher player counts. I'll also say that the tightness of the game, because this is a game that goes 30 to 45 minutes, gives you a lot of, trying to stay alive as you figure out how the killer is going to sense you, where they're trying to rush you down. The tightness of the game experience, it does mean that it does fall into patterns of play as you go through it. It starts getting into the cycle. A lot of it initially is exploration, then you have these items that will mix things up, and you're learning a particular killer you're facing off against. But after a game or two with each killer, you're going to start falling into patterns of, okay, now we're just playing this mind game of, did I go for the key or did I wait a turn because you're going to hunt me down there. Those patterns of mind think in a shorter experience do develop given the limitation of the number of actions you have at your disposal and the general structure of the game experience. The main thing that's going to mix that up for you is playing as a different killer, of which there are only 3 in the core box, so that's a limited degree of replayability there, and then also mixing in those separate plan cards, which will force you to re-examine how you approach things. So there are things you can do to this, but the basic game experience I do find falls into patterns of that mind think between the players of, door 1 or door 2, what do you think I did this particular turn? As far as I can see others not liking, first of all, it is better at 2 or 4 players because of the balance of the player count. At a 4-player game, you are at least controlling a character each. At a 2-player game, you're controlling all 3 yourself. At a 3-player game, you have 2 people on this side who are working together to control the 3, which either means one person is doing 2, one person is doing 1, or it means you're playing that hodgepodge, let's decide together, which especially in a game where you don't want to be talking too much can limit the degree of fun. So I do think this works best as a 2 or 4-player game. I think primarily as a 2-player game because of that action economy aspect of running around and all that. So I think it works best too, but 3-player is functional. It wouldn't be my preferred player count. And then separately, I'll say that it can feel lost as the killer depending on your experience with the game or how well you've played or even which killer you play as first. For example, Butcher, which I think is the default starting character that's implied to be the starting character, isn't what I would recommend for your first character. Because Butcher and Spectre, for example, just to use 2 of the characters, have very different challenges. Spectre is very weak, Butcher has a hard time finding people. The tricky part there is Spectre, at least if you're playing a Spectre, you'll be able to find people, even if you have a hard time getting as many hits in. Versus if you just feel lost the entire time, which Butcher can feel lost if you're not better at the game yet, Butcher can feel lost unless you pad it out with balance cards, those trait cards to balance the game. And that means that you might spend half the game whiffing, moving a little, whiffing, moving, whiffing, and that's not a totally satisfying experience. And by totally satisfying, I mean it can be definitely not a satisfying experience at all. And so that's kind of the things there. As far as final thoughts on this game, as far as final thoughts on Terrorscape, there are a lot of things that I really enjoy with Terrorscape, and I should note this is a well-loved game. It's a well-loved game, and I like it a lot. For me, this is a 3.5 out of 5, and some of that does come down to the fact that I think the biggest things that take away from the experience, I still enjoy this one a lot, and I'd say my early play started off even stronger, and the more I played it, the more I found that, again, the tightness of the game experience does mean that I fell into patterns in this game faster than I would in other games that have that hidden movement aspect to it, and then combine that with the setup over here, does mean that this is one that I'm like, do I want to pull it out and table it? The thought process, the energy behind do I want to sit down and play Terrorscape is a little lower than games in the genre because of the combination of the tightness of the experience and therefore repetitive play, and then the fact that you have this setup barrier in play. For me, and this is one of those games that I wrestle with the rating. Do I give it a 4? Do I give it a 3.5? Because it is in that spot where the game is very, very good. I think your first play of Terrorscape is going to capture you far more than your 7th game of Terrorscape. I do think it has a lot of charm, it has a lot of table presence, it has a lot of things that really, really work well for you. This might be one of the better, in fact, I don't even want to say might. I would say in terms of the hidden movement games that I'd recommend, if I was recommending somebody a first game experience that is going to give you the best hidden movement game experience from any one that I can recommend, I do think Terrorscape probably fits that bill. The accessibility of the rules, the ease of teach, the short of play, and the table presence all combine to make this possibly your best, not necessarily you, but somebody's best first hidden movement game. But I think some of those things don't have the same degree of benefit over time. I think the accessibility and the shorter playtime mean there's less depth in this experience compared to some other hidden movement games. This giant thing over here, which is not a huge big deal setup. At the end of the day, the table presence benefit goes down over time, and the setup aspect and storage and box size and all that, those are all going to be there over time. So I think this is one of the best first hidden movement games you can play, but not necessarily the best long-term ones that I'd recommend. So a 3.5 out of 5. Definitely a lot of conflict here as far as the pros, because again, they're kind of front end staggered or front weighted, or how do you phrase that? Whatever, you know what I'm saying. The first few plays are better, but over time it definitely shifted a bit down for me. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, Mind Management. If you're looking for a shorter game, a shorter hidden movement game that has a ton of depth and replayability to it, Mind Management is going to be one of my favorite hidden movement games in the genre. And if you want a hidden movement game that leans a bit more into the horror theme, like Terrorscape does, then check out Dead by Daylight from Level 99 Games. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.